Have you ever heard a baby cry so hard that you thought their soul might crack open as a mother? Not the hungry or the tired kind. The kind that scrapes down your spine and makes your body respond whether you want it to or not. That's the sound that changed my life. October 19th, 2024. Route 7. Crosstown. Somewhere in the hidden cities of New York. On that late-night shift bus that smells like wet wool, diesel exhaust, and somebody's leftover food going bad in a plastic bag. My name is Angelina Jakes, 28 years old, certified nursing assistant at Riverside Meadows Care Facility on the South Side. And on that particular Tuesday night, I was 72 hours into the kind of stress that makes your teeth ache. Franklin was asleep against my shoulder, 16 months old. Still nursing, still warm, still mine. I'd just finished my third double shift that week. Mrs. Helen Chen in room 12 had stopped breathing at 4:17 p.m. I held her hand, sang her Amazing Grace, even though I can't carry a tune. No family came, not one person. The heater was busted, again. So the October cold leaked through the window seals and turned every breath into a visible ghost. Outside, the rain didn't just fall. It attacked, hammered the pavement, turned the streets into black mirrors that reflected the red and green of traffic lights like open wounds. And then I heard it. The scream came from the last row. A man sat there, stone-faced, Korean, maybe 35. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my rent. Custom-tailored, the kind you see in financial district windows behind locked glass. His shoes were Italian leather. I know because my ex used to obsess over shoes he'd never afford. But his hands? His hands were shaking. The baby couldn't have been more than 4 months old. Her face was crimson. Sweat soaked through her onesie. Pale yellow with Korean characters embroidered on the chest. Expensive? Probably organic cotton. Probably cost $60. None of that mattered, because she was breaking. See, I used to work in child protective services before I burned out. Before the system chewed me up and spit me into elder care. And I know the difference between a baby who's fussy and a baby whose nervous system is on fire. This wasn't hunger. This was desperation. The baby's voice was starting to crack. That hoarse, broken quality that happens when an infant has been crying for so long, their vocal cords start to fray. 2 other passengers, a college kid with headphones and an older white woman clutching a CVS pharmacy bag, got off at the Meridian Street stop. They practically ran. The bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror, annoyed, not concerned, annoyed. And that's when my body betrayed me. My milk let down. It's a Pavlovian response. Hardwired. A baby screams, and if you're lactating, your body responds whether you consent or not. Warmth spread across my chest. I felt the fabric of my nursing bra dampen under my scrubs. Franklin wasn't even awake, but my body heard that scream and said, "There's a baby starving. Fix it." I should have minded my business. I should have gotten off at my stop, Gilmore and 5th, walked the 3 blocks home through the rain, and put Franklin to bed in our tiny studio apartment with the rattling radiator and the upstairs neighbor who screams at his girlfriend every Thursday. I should have. But then the man looked up. I stood up. Franklin stirred against my chest, but didn't wake. Muscle memory. He's used to sleeping through my movements, through shift changes and bus rides, and the chaos of being raised by a single mother who's always one missed paycheck away from eviction. I walked toward the back, toward the man, toward the screaming baby. Up close, I saw the details, spit up crusted on his shoulder, shadows under his eyes so dark they looked like bruises that had been there for weeks. A spot of blood on his collar, small, dried, probably from a shaving nick. And the baby. God, the baby. Her little onesie was drenched. Her fists were clenched so tight her knuckles were white. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, were unfocused. She was shutting down. "Excuse me," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Professional. The voice I used at Riverside Meadows when I had to tell family members their loved one wasn't eating anymore. The man's head snapped up, his eyes locked on mine. For 3 full seconds, he didn't move, didn't blink. Then, "How long has she been crying?" I asked. His voice was flat, empty. 2 hours. "Has she eaten?" "She won't take the bottle." "How old is she?" 4 months, 3 weeks. I adjusted Franklin on my hip, looked at the baby, looked at the man, and I said something absolutely insane. "I can help, if you'll let me." The man stared at me like I'd spoken in a language that didn't exist yet. "How?" I took a breath that tasted like rain and diesel and the metallic edge of my own fear. "I'm nursing. I can feed her, right now, if she'll latch." The man looked at me, then at the baby, then back at me. His hands were still shaking, but something shifted in his face. Not hope, desperation that had finally found a rope. "Please." I should have asked his name. Should have asked where the baby's mother was. Should have asked why a man in a $3,000 suit was riding the number 7 bus at midnight with a starving infant and a bottle of cold formula. But I didn't, because the baby was already reaching for me. And when I lifted my shirt and the baby latched, immediate, desperate, perfect, the entire bus exhaled. That's when I saw his hands up close, scarred knuckles, a tattoo on his wrist, partially hidden by his watch, that looked like a dragon's tail. And when his jacket shifted, I saw the shoulder holster, the gun. I thought I was just feeding a hungry baby. I didn't know I was holding the heir to the White Dragon Syndicate. I didn't know her uncle had already tried to kill her twice. And I sure as hell didn't know that the man sitting across from me, the man who was crying silent tears of relief, had 17 confirmed kills to his name. But I was about to find out. Have you ever helped a complete stranger in a way that terrified you? Tell me in the comments, because what happened next, that changed everything. If you want to see how far compassion can take you and how dangerous love can become, hit that subscribe button. Because this story gets wild. 3 black SUVs, Cadillac Escalades, tinted windows, Illinois plates. They didn't follow traffic patterns. They hunted. The bus lurched to a stop at Meridian and 5th, my stop, and those SUVs materialized out of the rain like they'd been waiting, like they knew exactly where we'd be. 11:58 p.m., October 19th, 2024, the night I stopped being invisible. Juro's entire body changed. 1 second, he was this exhausted, terrified father cradling his daughter. The next, stone, ice. A switch flipped somewhere deep in his spine, and the man holding baby Mina became something else entirely. His left hand moved to his jacket, to the Glock 19 in his shoulder holster. His right hand stayed gentle on Mina's back. That contrast, violence and tenderness occupying the same body, made my stomach drop. "Stay seated," he said. Not loud, not panicked. The kind of command that doesn't expect to be questioned. Franklin stirred against my chest. Still asleep, still warm, still safe, for now. The SUVs didn't park. They stopped in the middle of Meridian Avenue, blocking traffic, emergency lights flashing, and 6 men stepped out. Not cops, Worse, they wore dark suits, earpieces, the kind of synchronized movement that screams private security or organized crime. In Chicago, at midnight, on the South Side, same thing. The bus driver, Carl, according to his name tag, maybe 55 union member for 23 years, looked in his rearview mirror and his face went gray. "Oh, hell no," he muttered. He reached for his radio. Company protocol, driver safety. One of the men from the lead Escalade tapped on the bus door. Didn't knock, tapped, with the barrel of a gun. Carl opened the door. Didn't have a choice. The man who stepped onto the bus was Korean, 30s. Expensive suit. Not as expensive as Juro's, but close. His face was blank, professional. He spoke in Korean, fast, clipped. I don't speak Korean, but I know a threat when I hear one. Juro responded in the same language. His voice was low, controlled, but I felt his heartbeat through Mina's body pressed against his chest, racing. Then the man switched to English. For my benefit, I realized later. "Mr. Lee, your father is concerned. You missed the family dinner. You're not answering calls. This is unacceptable." Juro didn't move. "I'm taking my daughter home." "Your father wants you at the estate, tonight, with the child." "No." That one word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. The man's eyes flicked to me, to Franklin asleep on my lap, to Mina in Juro's arms, back to me. "Who is she?" Juro's jaw tightened. "A friend." "Your father doesn't know about any friends." "My father doesn't need to know everything." The man pulled out a phone, Samsung Galaxy, took a photo of me, just like that. No permission, no warning. Flash, click. I flinched. Franklin woke up, started to whimper, and Juro stood, slow, deliberate, Mina still cradled in his left arm, his right hand inside his jacket. "If you send that photo," Juro said, voice so quiet it barely carried 3 feet, "I will kill you before sunrise. Do you understand me, Minjun?" Minjun smiled. Not a happy smile. The kind of smile that says, "I've heard that threat before, and I'm still standing. Your father said you'd be difficult. He said grief makes men stupid." Juro moved, fast, faster than a man holding a baby should be able to move. He was in Minjun's face in 2 steps, gun pressed against Minjun's ribs under his suit jacket, where the other passengers, the few who were left, couldn't see. "Tell my father I'll come to the estate tomorrow. 10 a.m. I'll bring Mina, but tonight I'm taking her home. My home, not his. And if he sends anyone else to follow me, I'll assume it's a threat, and I'll respond accordingly." Minjun's smile disappeared. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. Then Minjun stepped back. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Don't be late." He left. The SUVs pulled away. The bus sat there in stunned silence. Carl, the bus driver, closed the doors, didn't ask questions, started driving. Everyone who'd witnessed what just happened suddenly found somewhere else to look. Juro sat back down. His hands were shaking again. Mina was still calm, still content, like guns and threats were just background noise in her world. Maybe they were. I should have gotten off, should have grabbed Franklin, walked the 3 blocks to our studio apartment on Ashland Avenue, locked the door, and pretended this never happened. But I didn't. Because Juro looked at me with those drowning eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I never should have involved you." And I heard myself ask the question that would change everything. "Where's her mother?" Juro's face went completely blank. Not angry, not sad, empty. Dead. One word. I waited. Franklin had gone back to sleep. Mina was making soft baby sounds against Juro's chest. The bus rolled through the rain-soaked streets. And finally, Juro spoke again. Car accident, 3 weeks ago. October 1st, 2:47 p.m., intersection of North Avenue and Elston. Black sedan ran a red light, T-boned her driver's side door. She died at Northwestern Memorial Hospital 6 hours later. The way he said it, exact time, exact location, hospital name, told me everything. He'd memorized it, played it over and over in his head. The way you do when you can't accept that someone's gone. "I'm sorry," I said, "because what else do you say?" "Don't be." His voice was flat, dead. It wasn't an accident. Bite the seat. The bus reached my stop, Gilmore and 5th. The doors opened, rain poured in. I should have left. But Juro turned to me and said, "I'll pay you $10,000, 1 week. Just help me keep her alive until I can figure out who's trying to kill her." $10,000. That's 4 months of rent. That's catching up on every bill. That's diapers and formula and groceries and maybe a security deposit on a better apartment where the landlord doesn't threaten eviction every month. Franklin needed things, clothes, shoes. His pediatrician appointment I'd been putting off because I couldn't afford the copay. $10,000. 1 week. I looked at Mina, 4 months old, motherless. Someone wanted her dead. I looked at Franklin, 16 months old, fatherless. Someone needed to keep him fed. And I looked at Juro Lee, killer, father, desperate man. And I said, "Where do you live?" Juro pulled out his phone, made a call, spoke in Korean. 30 seconds later, a silver Mercedes S-Class pulled up beside the bus. Driver in a suit, earpiece, gun probably under his jacket. Juro stood. "Come with me, both of you. You'll be safe, I promise." I didn't believe him, but I got off that bus anyway, because sometimes survival looks like a bad decision, and sometimes compassion looks like insanity. I lifted Franklin, grabbed my bag, stepped into the rain, into the Mercedes, into a life I didn't understand. The car doors closed, bulletproof glass. I noticed that right away. And as we pulled away from the bus stop, heading toward the Gold Coast, toward a part of Chicago I'd only ever seen in movies, Juro said something that made my blood freeze. Mina's mother didn't die in that car accident. I stared at him. "You just said—" "I know what I said. Her heart stopped at Northwestern Memorial. That's true, but the accident didn't kill her." He looked down at Mina, then at me. My brother did. The automated voice announced Riverside and Morrison, my stop, and my stomach dropped because Mina was still latched to my breast, finally peaceful after 2 hours of that soul-destroying screaming that had filled the entire bus like smoke. I felt the man beside me tense up. This stranger named Juro Lee, whose daughter I was feeding in the back of a midnight bus, while my own son slept against my shoulder. And I knew what was coming before he even opened his mouth. Sometimes you just know when someone's about to ask you for something that's going to change everything, and your body knows it before your brain catches up, sending warning signals through your nervous system like electrical shocks telling you to run. But I'd never been good at running, never been good at saying no when someone needed help. And that's always been my problem, hasn't it? This compulsion to fix broken things, even when I'm barely holding myself together with duct tape and prayer. "I'll pay you." His voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath it, I heard something raw and desperate that made my chest tighten. "Whatever you need, please don't stop." The fluorescent lights overhead flickered and cast shadows across his face. And I saw that he wasn't just afraid. He was terrified in that particular way that only parents understand. That bone-deep terror that comes from knowing your child is suffering. And you can't fix it no matter how much money you have or how much power you wield, or how many hours you spend awake trying every possible solution until you're hallucinating from exhaustion. I shook my head before he even finished speaking, because I knew where this was going and I couldn't afford to get tangled up in whatever complicated situation this was. Not with Franklin depending on me, not with my own life barely functional. "I don't want your money," I said, and I meant it, even though I had exactly $47 in my checking account at Citizens Bank, and an eviction notice from Parkview Apartments folded up in my purse next to Mrs. Chen's unopened envelope. "But she needs to eat every 2 to 3 hours. You have more formula?" Even as I asked, I knew the answer from the desperate way he'd been trying to force that cold bottle into her mouth for the past hour, from the trembling in his hands, from the defeat in his shoulders. "She won't take it." Juro's voice cracked on the last word, just barely, and he cleared his throat like he could erase the emotion. "Hasn't for 3 days. I've tried 8 brands. Similac, Enfamil, the expensive European ones from Whole Foods, the hypoallergenic ones the pediatrician at Mount Sinai recommended, even goat milk formula that cost $60 a container." He trailed off, staring at his daughter nursing peacefully in my arms, and I watched something break behind his eyes. "The pediatrician said if she doesn't start eating soon, we'd need to hospitalize her for IV fluids, and I can't let that happen. I can't let her be in some hospital bed with tubes in her arms because I'm failing her, because I don't know how to be enough for her without her mother," I finished softly. Because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? This well-dressed man with expensive shoes and a watch that probably cost more than my car falling apart because he couldn't figure out how to feed his infant daughter alone. "Where is she?" The question came out gentler than I intended. Maternal instinct kicking in, even though I knew I shouldn't get involved, shouldn't ask questions. That would pull me deeper into this stranger's crisis. The pause stretched out so long I thought he wasn't going to answer, and the bus driver called out Riverside and Morrison again, more insistent this time, letting me know I needed to make a decision. Finally, Juro spoke, his voice flat and dead in a way that told me he'd said these words before, probably to doctors and social workers and whoever else had asked. Dead. Childbirth complications. But then he corrected himself quickly, like he'd rehearsed a more accurate version. "No, that's not right. Yuna survived the birth, nursed Mina for 3 months, was a natural at it, better at everything than I ever was." His jaw clenched, and I saw him swallow hard. Car accident 3 weeks ago at the intersection of 5th and Maple. Died at the scene. Since then, everything's been falling apart. Something about the way he said car accident made my social worker instincts kick in. That thing I'd learned in my 2 years at Presbyterian foster care services. Before the burnout got so bad, I had to switch to nursing home work just to survive. He said it too carefully, like someone reading from a script, and his hands curled into fists when he mentioned the intersection. But I pushed that observation aside because it wasn't my business, because I was about to get off this bus and go back to my crumbling studio apartment, and my regular life of barely making rent and stretching WIC benefits, and trying not to think about the hospital bill from Franklin's birth that I still owed St. Luke's Medical Center. I tried hiring wet nurses, Juro continued, and now the words were spilling out like he'd been holding them back for weeks. 2 of them. The first one my father fired after 1 day. Said she was a security risk, whatever that means. The second one lasted about 6 hours before she quit. She wouldn't tell me why, just grabbed her things and left. Said she couldn't work in that environment. He looked at me directly for the first time, and I saw desperation so raw it made my breath catch. I'm out of options. She's starving. I'm watching my daughter starve to death because I can't figure out how to keep her alive without her mother. The bus lurched to a stop and the doors hissed open, letting in cold December air that smelled like rain and exhaust fumes, and the Chinese restaurant on the corner of Riverside. I needed to get up, needed to collect my things and my son, and walk those 4 blocks home to my apartment before the 1 a.m. shift change at the bar on 3rd Street, when the sidewalks got dangerous. "I'll pump bottles for you," I heard myself say, because I couldn't just walk away from a starving baby, couldn't live with myself if I read about an infant hospitalization in the Metro Times next week and knew I could have prevented it. "Give me your number. I'll drop them off tomorrow after my shift at Meadowbrook Nursing Home. I work until 6, but I can meet you somewhere around 7. Come home with me tonight." Juro's words came out fast and urgent, and he must have seen me recoil because he held up his hands in a gesture that was probably meant to be reassuring, but just made my alarm bells ring louder. "Stay 1 week. I'll pay you $10,000. Cash? Tonight. Half now, half when the week ends." $10,000. The number hit me like cold water, and I felt my brain start doing calculations against my will, because that's what poverty does to you. It makes you put a price on everything, including your own safety and dignity. 4 months of rent at Parkview Apartments. Franklin's daycare at Little Stars Learning Center for 3 months. The $1,800 I owed St. Luke's Medical Center that kept getting sent to collections. Groceries that weren't just rice and beans, and whatever I could get from the food pantry at Riverside Community Church. Maybe even enough left over to start saving for something better. Some kind of future that didn't involve triple shifts, and choosing between the electric bill and my son's winter coat. The bus driver called out again, irritated now, and I knew I had about 30 seconds before he left with or without me, and I opened my mouth to say no, to say this was insane, to say I couldn't possibly go home with a complete stranger, no matter how much money he offered. Then, Juro's phone started buzzing in his jacket pocket, aggressive and insistent, and he shifted to ignore it, and that's when I saw the gun. The jacket fell open just enough to reveal a leather shoulder holster and the dark metal of what looked like a Glock 19. And my entire body went rigid because I'd seen guns before, grown up in neighborhoods where gunshots were just background noise, but I'd never sat on a bus breastfeeding a baby while the man next to me carried a loaded weapon 6 inches from my son's sleeping head. I clutched Franklin tighter, and Mina must have felt my tension because she pulled off my breast and started fussing. And Juro saw exactly where I was looking and saw the fear that must have been written all over my face. "You're safe," he said quietly, with absolute certainty, and something about the way he said it made me believe him, even though every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to grab my child and run. "I promise you, my daughter is not. That's why I need you." He pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward me, showing me a photo of a massive penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the downtown skyline. And then he swiped to show me a nursery that looked like something from a magazine, spread with a white crib and pale pink walls, and what looked like security cameras mounted in every corner. She'll have everything. You'll have protection. 24/7 security, panic buttons in every room, anything you need. Protection from what? My voice came out steadier than I felt, and I was proud of that. Proud that I could still ask the right questions even when my hands were shaking. Juro met my eyes and held them, and in that moment, I saw past the expensive suit and the gun and the polished exterior to something deeper and more damaged. Something that recognized the same brokenness in me. From people who want her dead, he said simply, like this was just a fact of his life. Like casual death threats against his infant daughter were normal Tuesday night conversation. I should have said no. Should have stood up right then and walked off that bus and never looked back. Should have protected my son from whatever dangerous world this man was inviting us into. Should have listened to every survival instinct I'd developed growing up in the foster care system at Gateway Family Services, where you learned quick that offers that sound too good to be true usually come with invisible price tags that cost more than money. But I looked down at Mina in my arms, finally content and peaceful after hours of suffering. And I looked at my own son sleeping against my shoulder, trusting me to make the right decisions. And I felt Mrs. Chen's envelope in my purse with whatever final message she'd left me. And I thought about the eviction notice that gave me 14 days to come up with 3 months back rent. I thought about how tired I was of drowning, how tired I was of choosing between bad options and worse ones, how tired I was of being strong and responsible and making the smart choice, when the smart choice just meant more years of barely surviving. Yes, I said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff, like that moment of free fall before you know whether you're going to hit water or rocks. 1 week, then I'm gone. Juro's entire body sagged with relief, and he nodded once, sharp and grateful, and pulled out his phone to make a call, speaking rapid Korean to someone on the other end. I stood up carefully, adjusting Mina against my shoulder and making sure Franklin didn't wake up, gathering my purse and my dignity and whatever scraps of good judgment I had left. The bus driver gave me an exasperated look as I moved toward the front, and I mumbled an apology, and that's when I saw them through the rain-streaked windows. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows pulling up to the curb in perfect formation, water spraying from their tires, looking like something from a movie about federal agents or organized crime or expensive funerals. The lead vehicle's headlights cut through the December darkness and illuminated the bus interior, and I felt my heart start racing because this wasn't normal. None of this was normal, and I just agreed to go home with a man whose daughter needed armed security guards and bulletproof vehicles and protection from people who wanted to kill a 4-month-old baby. What the hell had I just said yes to? The elevator opened directly into the penthouse on the 42nd floor of Millennium Tower, and I stepped into silence so complete it felt like walking into a vacuum. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the entire space, showing the city skyline glittering through December rain, and marble floors stretched out like black mirrors, reflecting nothing but emptiness. Everything was white and chrome and sterile, the kind of beautiful that feels more like a warning than an invitation. And I clutched Franklin tighter because this place didn't feel like somewhere children belonged. 4 men in dark suits appeared from different doorways, speaking into earpieces in rapid Korean mixed with English, and they bowed to Juro with military precision before their eyes slid past me like I was invisible, like I was just another piece of furniture he'd purchased for the week. The nursery made my breath catch, but not in a good way. The door was reinforced steel painted to look like wood, and inside, I saw cameras mounted in every corner with red lights blinking, medical equipment from Anderson Pediatric Supply lined against one wall, and a temperature control panel that looked more complicated than anything at Meadowbrook Nursing Home where I worked. The baby monitor system had 4 different screens showing overlapping angles of the crib, and I realized this wasn't a nursery. This was a surveillance bunker designed to keep a 4-month-old baby alive against threats I couldn't begin to imagine. "Don't leave this floor," Juro said, his voice cold and businesslike now that we were in his territory. "Don't answer the door. Don't talk to anyone but me and Mrs. Kang, the housekeeper. Your phone stays at the charging station by the elevator." He pointed to a red panic button mounted beside the nursery door. "Emergency button is here. Press it if anything feels wrong." Something hot and defensive flared in my chest, the same feeling I used to get at Gateway Family Services when caseworkers talked about me like I wasn't in the room. "I'm not a prisoner," I said, hearing my voice shake but pushing through anyway. "I have a son. I have a life. I agreed to help your daughter, not to disappear." Juro looked at me with eyes that had probably watched people die and felt nothing. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet but absolute. "You have a job. 1 week. Then you're free." The way he said free made it sound like a foreign concept, like something he'd heard about but never actually experienced. Mrs. Kang appeared then, a Korean woman in her 60s with steel gray hair pulled back tight, and an expression that suggested she'd survived worse things than me. She looked at Franklin sleeping against my shoulder, and something in her face cracked open just slightly, softened in a way that told me she understood what it meant to protect a child in a dangerous world. Later, I'd learned she lost her own daughter 20 years ago, that grief had carved out a permanent hollow space in her chest that never quite healed. That first night stretched into eternity. I fed Mina every 3 hours while my body screamed for sleep, and every single time I looked up, Juro was standing in the doorway watching us like a ghost haunting his own home. He never spoke, never came closer, just stood there with his hands in his pockets and devastation written across his face. At 3 in the morning, I started humming an old gospel song from the Williams foster home. Something about green pastures and still waters. And Mina finally relaxed completely against my chest. That's when Juro came in and sat down in the chair by the window. And in the dim glow from the moonlight baby nightlight, I saw something so broken in his expression that my anger dissolved into something closer to grief. I didn't know then what he was remembering. Didn't know about the hospital room at Seoul Medical Center 3 weeks ago, where his wife Yuna held their daughter with blood soaking through the sheets, faster than the nurses could change them. I didn't know her last words were, "Don't let them take her, promise me," whispered at 11:47 p.m. before the machines started screaming and the doctors couldn't save her. I didn't know about the CCTV footage from 5th and Maple that Juro watched every night on his laptop. The black sedan that T-boned Yuna's Mercedes at exactly 2:47 p.m., the way the driver fled while she bled out on wet pavement. The police report from Metro PD that called it an accident, even though everything about the impact angle and timing screamed calculated murder. I didn't know his father, Juro Lee, controlled the White Dragon Syndicate, with 3 sons competing for succession. Didn't know Yuna was the daughter of a rival organization, and their marriage was supposed to create peace, but instead painted a target on their daughter's back. Didn't know Juro's older brother, Taejin, wanted Mina dead because her mixed bloodline threatened his claim to power. On day 2, I explored the penthouse during Mina's nap and found a locked door at the end of the east hallway. My hand was on the knob when Mrs. Kang appeared behind me so quietly I jumped. "Mr. Lee's office," she said in heavily accented English. "Never go in." Something about the way she said it made me think of locked rooms in fairy tales that contained the bodies of previous wives, and I stepped back quickly. Franklin was getting more difficult by the hour, crying for our apartment at Parkview, for his toys, for anything familiar, and I rocked him at 2 a.m. while pumping milk, exhaustion settling into my bones like lead. That's when Juro appeared with coffee, real espresso from a Breville machine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "You didn't have to stay up," he said quietly. I looked at him over Franklin's head and said, "She's easier when I do." And our eyes met for the first time with real recognition. 2 lonely people drowning in responsibility, and something passed between us that felt dangerous and inevitable. The security alarm shattered the moment, shrieking through the penthouse like the end of the world. Bodyguards materialized with guns drawn, shouting in Korean. And Juro moved so fast he was a blur, positioning himself in front of the nursery door with one arm reaching back to shield not just Mina, but me and Franklin too. It turned out to be nothing, just a cat from the neighboring balcony triggering the motion sensors. But in that split second, I saw who Juro really was beneath the expensive suit and grief-stricken father routine. Saw the trained killer who could switch from gentle to lethal without blinking. Later that night, I heard him on the phone in the hallway speaking rapid Korean. And even though I couldn't understand most of it, I caught enough English phrases to know he was giving orders, telling someone to find him and make it clean. And my stomach dropped because I understood exactly what that meant. I stared at the $5,000 in cash sitting on my dresser at the Hampton Inn Quality guest room, and realized I'd brought my son into the home of a man who ordered executions as casually as other people ordered takeout from Golden Dragon Restaurant on 3rd Street. I should have left right then. Should have packed our things and walked out into the December rain and never looked back. Money or no money, because some things aren't worth the price. But I looked at Mina sleeping peacefully in her fortress crib for the first time in days, and I thought about the eviction notice from Parkview Apartments, and I told myself it was just 5 more days, just 120 more hours, and then we'd be gone forever. On day 3, I found the photographs hidden in the linen closet, and everything I thought I knew about Juro Lee shattered into 1,000 pieces. The photo album fell from the top shelf of the linen closet when I was reaching for extra blankets at 2 in the afternoon on day 3, tumbling down and hitting the marble floor of the guest bathroom with a sound like a gunshot that made my heart jump into my throat. I picked it up with shaking hands, knowing immediately I shouldn't look, knowing this was private in the way that grief is always private. But I opened it anyway because I needed to understand who I was really dealing with in this fortress at Millennium Tower. The first photo showed a woman I'd never seen before, Korean and impossibly beautiful, pregnant and glowing in a yellow sundress at what looked like Riverside Park, laughing at something off camera with her hand on her swollen belly. The next page showed the same woman in a hospital bed at Seoul Medical Center, holding a tiny newborn wrapped in pink. And her smile was so radiant it made my chest ache. Then there were beach photos from Cape May, the woman and Juro building sandcastles with their hands intertwined, and finally a wedding photo that stopped me cold because both of them were crying, not sad tears, but the kind of happy crying that comes from finding something you thought you'd never have. Mrs. Kang found me sitting on the bathroom floor with the album in my lap, and tears running down my face, and instead of scolding me, she sat down beside me with a heavy sigh that sounded like it carried 20 years of sorrow. "That's Yuna," she said quietly in her accented English. "Mr. Lee's wife. Mina's mother." She touched one of the beach photos with a wrinkled finger. "Arranged marriage, you understand? The families, they make deal for business, for peace between organizations. Yuna hated him at first, hated being sold like property to the White Dragon Syndicate. But Mr. Lee gave her something nobody expected." She paused, looking at me to make sure I was listening. "He gave her choice. Said she could leave anytime, no consequences. He would tell his father the marriage failed because of him. 2 years she stayed, and somewhere in that time they fell in love for real. Not pretend love for the families, but actual love, the kind that changes people." Mrs. Kang's voice cracked slightly. "Mina was miracle baby. Yuna had fertility problems. Doctors said, maybe never children. But then suddenly she was pregnant, and Mr. Lee, he transformed completely. Smiled, laughed, left important business meetings early to read baby books from Barnes and Noble. Then she died, and he died too. Just his body forgot to stop moving. I found Juro in his office an hour later, the locked room I wasn't supposed to enter. But I didn't knock, just pushed open the door because I needed answers, and I was tired of being treated like someone who didn't deserve the truth. He was watching the CCTV footage again on his laptop, the black sedan hitting Yuna's Mercedes at the intersection of 5th and Maple, and his face was so blank it looked like a mask. "You're not doing this for Mina," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "You're doing this because you couldn't save Yuna, and keeping your daughter alive is the only way you know how to apologize to a dead woman." Juro's control shattered like glass. "Every time I look at her, I see my wife dying," he said, and his voice broke completely, all the careful composure crumbling into raw pain. "I hear her screaming in that car. I smell the smoke and burning metal. I can't hold my own daughter without shaking because my hands, these hands that are supposed to protect her, they failed the person I loved most in the world." He stood up so violently his chair fell backward. "I insisted Yuna take Maple Street that day because it was faster. I didn't send extra security because I thought we were past the threats from the River District clan. I was in a meeting at the White Dragon headquarters when she called saying someone was following her, and I told her she was being paranoid, told her to just drive home, and 20 minutes later she was dead." The truth about the wet nurses came tumbling out then. How he'd sabotaged both of them with impossible demands and manufactured conflicts, because accepting help meant accepting that Yuna was really gone, that he had to figure out how to be a father alone, and he wasn't ready for that finality. "You don't need a wet nurse," I told him, moving closer even though everything in me said to maintain distance from this man and his dangerous world. "You need to grieve, and she needs a father, not a bodyguard standing in the doorway afraid to touch her." That night, Franklin spiked a fever of 103 degrees, and I panicked in the way only mothers understand, that primal terror that something's wrong with your child, and you can't fix it. Juro called a private pediatrician from Metropolitan Health Services, who arrived at the penthouse within 15 minutes, even though it was midnight. And while the doctor examined Franklin in the guest room, Juro sat beside me in the hallway and said quietly, "He'll be fine. You're a good mother. He's lucky." Something about his tone, gentle and genuine, made me start talking about things I never discussed with anyone, about growing up in foster care at Gateway Family Services, about aging out of the system at 18 with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and a social worker's business card, about Franklin's father who disappeared when I was 5 months pregnant and sent exactly $0 in child support. "I know what it's like to be abandoned," I said, looking at Juro directly. "Don't do that to her. Don't let your guilt turn you into an absence." The next morning, I forced Juro to hold Mina during her feeding, physically guiding his shaking hands to support her head properly, positioning his arms the way they needed to be. "Look at her eyes," I instructed. "She's not Yuna. She's not a ghost, or a reminder, or a punishment. She's herself, and she needs you to see her." Mina looked up at her father's face for what might have been the first time he'd really allowed it, and she reached up with one tiny hand and touched his cheek. And Juro froze completely before crumbling into the kind of sobbing that comes from a place so deep you didn't know it existed. I held him while he cried, with our hands overlapping on his daughter's back, and the moment stretched into something that felt dangerous and inevitable, and like standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. Then his phone lit up on the table beside us with a text message I could see clearly because I was standing right there. "Brother knows about the nurse. Move her." Mrs. Kang appeared in the doorway with fear written across her face. Taejin's men were in the lobby today asking the doorman at Millennium Tower about new residents, about women with babies. Juro's devastation transformed instantly into cold calculation. "You're moving to the master bedroom," he said, already standing, already shifting into protection mode. "It connects directly to the nursery, reinforced walls. You sleep there? I'll take the couch, starting now." He looked at me with eyes that had gone from vulnerable to lethal in seconds. "I won't let anything happen to you or your son. I promise." I should have run right then, should have grabbed Franklin and disappeared into the December night. But instead, I heard myself say, "We'll stay." I decided to stay. 24 hours later, they came for us. I woke at 4:30 a.m. on day 5 to the sound of gunshots, muffled and strange like someone coughing through a pillow. And for 3 confused seconds, I thought I was dreaming until I heard a bodyguard shouting in Korean from somewhere in the penthouse, and my entire body went cold with the kind of fear that bypasses your brain and goes straight to your nervous system. The master bedroom door exploded inward, and Juro was there with a Glock 19 drawn, still wearing the sweatpants sweatpants he'd slept in on the couch. His face transformed into something I didn't recognize. "Get Franklin," he said in a voice so calm it was terrifying. "Get in the nursery, lock the reinforced door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Then he was gone, and I heard more gunshots, closer now, and the security alarm started shrieking through Millennium Tower like the building itself was screaming. I grabbed Franklin from the bed where he'd been sleeping beside me and ran for the nursery, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the handle. And Mina was already awake and crying in her crib, sensing the chaos with that animal instinct babies have for danger. I scooped her up with my free arm and hit the reinforced door lock, hearing it slide into place with a heavy metallic sound that was supposed to be reassuring, but just made me think about coffins being sealed. Both children were screaming now, Franklin calling Mama over and over in that panicked way that rips your heart into pieces. And I could hear gunfire and shouting and furniture breaking on the other side of the door. And I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, even though the nursery was temperature controlled at exactly 72 degrees. The panic button was already activated, the red light blinking like a heartbeat. And somewhere in my brain I registered that police from Metro PD were 8 minutes away, and private security from Sentinel Protection Services was 12 minutes away, which meant we had at least 8 minutes of being completely vulnerable to whatever was happening out there. I looked at the baby monitor screens and saw Juro moving through the hallway like something from an action movie, efficient and brutal and terrifyingly competent. And I watched him shoot 2 men I'd never seen before, watched them fall, and I had to look away because seeing someone die in real time is different than seeing it on TV. It's final in a way your brain can't quite process. Mrs. Kang appeared on one of the monitors, trying to shield the bedroom door, her body positioned protectively, even though she was unarmed and 63 years old. And then I saw the impact, saw her stumble backward with red blooming across her shoulder, saw her fall. And I made a sound I didn't recognize as coming from my own throat. 6 armed men had breached the penthouse according to what I could piece together from the monitor feeds, all of them wearing black tactical gear. And I knew without being told that Taejin had sent them, that the orders were to kill Mina, and probably me too, to make it look like a home invasion gone wrong, to eliminate the complications in his path to controlling the White Dragon Syndicate. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze, a mechanical whirring sound coming from the nursery door itself. And I realized one of the attackers had reached us and was using some kind of power tool to cut through the reinforced lock that was supposed to keep us safe. I grabbed the heavy ceramic lamp from the changing table, the only weapon I could find, and positioned myself between the door and the children, holding Franklin and Mina against my body, while I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. This is my fault, I thought, the words running through my head like a curse. I brought my son into a war zone for money because I was desperate and selfish and stupid, and now he's going to die because his mother made the wrong choice, because I thought $10,000 was worth more than his safety. What kind of mother am I? What kind of person does that make me? Mama, Franklin kept crying, and I was singing now through my tears, singing that old gospel song about green pastures and still waters, singing because it was the only thing I could do, while the door lock sparked and smoked, and I knew we had maybe 30 seconds before it gave way completely. Then I heard Juro's voice shouting something in Korean, and the sound of running footsteps. And a gunshot came through the door gap so close I felt the air pressure change, and someone on the other side made a choking sound and fell. The door exploded inward, kicked open with such force it hit the wall, and Juro was standing there covered in blood that I knew wasn't all his, gun still smoking. And behind him in the hallway, I could see 3 bodies sprawled across the marble floor in positions that bodies aren't supposed to make. "I can't do this," I heard myself say, my voice breaking completely. "I can't. You promised we'd be safe. You promised." Juro looked at me holding his daughter and my son with a lamp raised, like a pathetic weapon, and something in his face just shattered. He fell to his knees right there in the doorway, surrounded by violence and death, and said, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, this is my fault, all of it. I should never have brought you here. I should never have put you in danger." Police flooded the penthouse within minutes. Metro PD officers with guns drawn, treating the place like a crime scene, asking questions I couldn't answer because my brain had shut down. And Juro's lawyer from Chen and Associates appeared like he'd been waiting for this exact emergency, already spinning the story about an attempted robbery, about self-defense, about how Mr. Lee was a legitimate businessman defending his home. At Mercy General Hospital, I sat beside Mrs. Kang's bed while she came out of surgery, the bullet removed from her shoulder, and I held her hand and said, "I'm so sorry." And she squeezed my fingers weakly and said, "Not your fault, child. This is old war, old blood. You just got caught in the middle." Juro's father, Daejung, arrived at the penthouse that afternoon. A man in his 70s who radiated power like a physical force. And I heard him shouting at Juro in Korean before switching to English. "Send the woman home. Send Mina to the safe house in Busan. This ends now." But Juro's voice when he answered was cold and absolute. "No, we end, Taejin, today." I heard them arguing about methods and timing, about family loyalty versus survival, and I realized Juro was planning to kill his own brother, that this was the final line being crossed, that there was no coming back from what he was about to do. I started packing our bags with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, throwing clothes into my duffel while Franklin clung to my leg. "We're leaving," I told Juro when he appeared in the bedroom doorway. "This isn't my world. You can't love a child and be a murderer. Those 2 things can't exist in the same person." He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much death to ever be fully alive again, and said, "I'm already a murderer, been one for 15 years, but I'm also a father, and I will do whatever it takes to keep her alive even if you hate me for it." "She won't survive without love," I said, feeling tears running down my face that I was too tired to wipe away. "And love can't live in a house built on blood." Juro pulled the Glock from his shoulder holster and dropped it on the table between us with a heavy metallic sound, and said quietly, "Then help me be better. One more day. After tomorrow, Taejin will be gone. Not dead, but exiled." My father agreed. "Then you can leave or stay. Your choice." I should have walked out right then, should have grabbed my son and disappeared into the December afternoon and never looked back. But Mina reached for me from her crib, making that sound babies make when they want their mother. And she said, "Mama," for the first time, clear as anything, and I knew I was already too deep to walk away. The sound of power drills at 6 in the morning should have woken her, but Angelina hadn't slept at all. She sat in the corner of the master bedroom at the Park Avenue penthouse, Franklin pressed against her chest, watching contractors replace the bullet-riddled doorframe while her hands shook uncontrollably. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that attacker's shadow moving toward the nursery where Mina had been screaming, heard the suppressed gunfire echoing through marble hallways, smelled the copper tang of blood that had soaked into the hardwood floors. Juro found her there at 7:15, still wearing the same milk-stained nursing tank top from the night before. He looked worse than she did, his white dress shirt replaced by a black t-shirt that showed the bandage wrapping his left shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. He didn't say good morning. He just walked past her into the nursery where Mina was sleeping in her custom-built Italian crib and stood there watching his daughter's chest rise and fall like he was trying to memorize the rhythm in case he never saw it again. "It's done," he finally said, his voice rough. "My father made the call 2 hours ago. Taejin's on a plane to the Seoul office right now, stripped of his succession rights. The White Dragon Syndicate's board received formal notice at dawn. You're safe now." Angelina wanted to believe him, but she'd spent too many years in the foster care system learning to read the space between what people said and what they meant. Right now, Juro Lee was standing in that nursery doorway like a man waiting for the next disaster to hit. "But are you," she asked, "safe, I mean? Or are you just standing here waiting for the next brother to make his move? The next cousin who wants Mina dead? The next threat you can't control?" Something cracked in his carefully maintained composure. He'd killed 3 men last night to protect his daughter and the woman who'd been feeding her, and Angelina could see the weight of that settling into the lines around his eyes. "I've been planning an exit strategy," he admitted, sitting on the floor beside her. "Before Yuna died, I started moving money offshore, setting up accounts in Singapore and the Cayman Islands. I have enough to disappear, take Mina somewhere quiet. We could just vanish." "But you haven't," Angelina said. "My father won't allow it. The second I leave the syndicate, they'll hunt me forever because walking away makes me weak and weak men get killed. They'd take her back, raise her in this world I'm trying to escape." He pressed his palms against his eyes. "I'm trapped, and I trapped you and Franklin with me." Angelina felt something shift inside her chest. She'd spent her whole life being acted upon, moved from foster home to foster home, aged out of the system at 18 with nothing, pregnant at 26 by a man who disappeared. She'd been so busy surviving that she'd forgotten what it felt like to actually choose something. "What if you didn't disappear?" she said slowly. "What if you just stepped back, handed power to someone else willingly, like you're choosing a successor instead of running away?" Juro stared at her. "You don't understand how this works. Then change how it works. You told me you have a younger brother, Minjun, the diplomatic one who handles the legitimate business operations in Tokyo and Los Angeles. What if you publicly backed him for leadership, made it clear you're supporting his claim because you believe he's better suited for it?" She leaned forward. "Not because you're weak, but because you're smart enough to see what the organization needs." She watched him process this, saw the moment it clicked. "It could work," Juro said quietly. "If I frame it as a strategic business decision instead of a retreat, my father would respect that. Minjun's been angling for more influence anyway. Then you and Mina get out clean, and your brother gets what he wants, and everybody wins." Angelina felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years, that rush of solving a problem instead of being crushed by it. The morning light shifted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time since the attack, Juro's shoulders dropped from their defensive hunch. He reached into the crib and carefully lifted Mina out, and his hands weren't shaking anymore. "Hey, little one," he whispered, "Daddy's got you." Mina's tiny fist grabbed onto his shirt collar and held on, and Angelina watched something fundamental shift in Juro's entire body language. Eventually, Mina started rooting against his chest, making those hungry, chirping sounds. And Angelina retrieved a bottle of her pumped milk from the warmer. She handed it to him and watched him angle it correctly, and the baby latched on without hesitation. "She's eating," Juro said, his voice breaking. "She's actually eating for me. Because you're calm. Babies feel everything." That afternoon, Franklin and Juro played with wooden blocks on the living room carpet while Mina dozed nearby. "Ruro," Franklin said, mangling the pronunciation. "Big one." "That's right, buddy. Big one on the bottom so it's stable." Juro helped him place it carefully. "Good job." Angelina's throat went tight watching them. Franklin's father had never even met him, and here was this dangerous man patiently teaching her baby about structural engineering. That night, on the penthouse balcony overlooking Fifth Avenue, they shared wine and talked about dreams. "I wanted to open a community center," Angelina said, "for foster kids, where they could get a hot meal and help with homework and just talk to someone who understood." "I'll fund it," Juro said simply. "All of it. Not as payment, as partnership." "You're serious?" "I've spent 15 years moving money for terrible people. I'd like to spend the next 15 moving it towards something that matters." He set his wine glass down. "I don't deserve you, Angelina, but I want to try. I want to be the man Yuna thought I could be." "I'm scared," Angelina whispered, "of you, of this world, of what I'm starting to feel." Juro touched her hand. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You're not someone who needs rescuing. You're someone who does the rescuing." They were standing very close now, close enough to feel his breath on her face. He started to lean in, and she started to meet him halfway. And then Mina's cry cut through the baby monitor clipped to his belt. They both jumped back, laughing. Mrs. Kang returned the next morning, her right arm in a sling. She took one look at Angelina and pulled her into a fierce hug. "You gave him hope," Juro translated, "first time since Yuna died." That evening, Angelina laid out her terms. "I'll stay through tomorrow like we agreed. But after that, we figure this out together. No more secrets about the syndicate. No more decisions about my safety without talking to me first. If we're going to do this, we do it as equals." Juro held out his hand. "No more secrets. Partners in everything. I promise." They shook on it, and for the first time in her adult life, Angelina Richardson felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They had one more day. And then the ghost of Juro Lee came home and burned their fragile new world to the ground. Day 7 arrived with deceptive normalcy. Angelina woke at dawn in the Park Avenue penthouse and began transitioning Mina to formula, measuring scoops of organic powder into sterilized bottles while her heart broke quietly. This was the final day of their agreement. The last morning she'd pretend to be someone's family. She'd packed most of her and Franklin's belongings the night before, trying not to think about returning to her studio apartment in Bed-Stuy, where the heat barely worked. The doorbell rang at 9:47. Nobody got past lobby security at the Manhattan Tower without clearance, and the morning bodyguard shift had just started. Angelina heard commotion in the entrance hall, voices rising in rapid Korean, footsteps rushing. She picked up Mina and found Juro frozen in front of the security monitor, his face drained of color, hands shaking. He pressed the button to unlock the door, and when it swung open, Angelina's entire understanding of reality shattered. Juro Lee stood in the doorway. She was thinner than in the wedding photos, her face marked by a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. Her black hair had been cut short and ragged, and her eyes were haunted. This woman had been to hell and barely crawled back. "Juro," Juro whispered, and he crossed the distance in 3 strides, pulling his wife into his arms with a sound that was half sob and half prayer. Angelina couldn't breathe. The dead didn't come back, and the woman Juro had been mourning for 3 weeks was alive and standing 5 feet away. "The accident was real," Juro said when she could speak. "I woke up 2 weeks later in a private facility in Westchester County. Taejin's people had me, kept me sedated, moved me twice. They said if I tried to escape, they'd kill Mina." She touched her scar. "This is from when I tried anyway. When your father sent Taejin to Seoul yesterday, his operation fell apart. The guards fled. I walked out this morning and took a taxi home." Yuna's eyes found Angelina holding Mina, and her face transformed. "My baby. Oh God, my baby." Angelina placed Mina in her mother's arms, watched Juro sink to her knees, and cradle her daughter while crying soundlessly. "She's so big. I missed everything." "She's healthy," Angelina heard herself say. "She's been eating well, sleeping through the night. She likes to be rocked counterclockwise." Juro looked up. "You've been nursing her. You saved my daughter. How do I ever thank you for that?" "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad she has her mother back." Angelina looked at Franklin. "We should go. You need time together as a family." Juro pulled an envelope from his jacket. $50,000 for everything. "I didn't do it for money," Angelina said. "Please," Juro added, "take it. You gave me back my world." Angelina took enough cash to cover 6 months of expenses and handed the envelope back. She held Mina one final time, whispered, "Be happy, little one. You have your mama now," and walked out without looking at Juro's face, because if she did, she'd break completely. Back in the penthouse, Juro watched her husband stare at the closed door. "You love her. I love you. You're my wife. And you can love us both. She saved more than Mina. She saved you." 1 week later, Angelina was back to double shifts at the Crown Heights nursing home. But there was a check on her counter for $200,000 and a note for the community center, no strings, Y&J. The knock came on a Tuesday evening. Juro, Juro, and Mina stood in her hallway looking nervous. "We want you in her life," Juro said, "as godmother, as friend, as family." Her voice cracked. "I can't breastfeed anymore. The trauma, the medication. Mina's been refusing formula for 3 days. Would you consider nursing her part-time? Weekly visits?" "We all need you," Juro added quietly. They built something unprecedented. Weekly visits where Angelina nursed Mina while Juro and Juro cooked dinner, where Franklin and Mina played together. Juro stepped back from the White Dragon Syndicate's violent operations, letting his brother Minjun take over while he managed legitimate real estate holdings across Los Angeles and Tokyo. 6 months later, Juro discovered the truth reviewing his father's security files. Taejin hadn't orchestrated Yuna's kidnapping. Daejong Lee had, testing his son. "You needed to be ruthless," Daejong admitted when confronted at the syndicate's Koreatown headquarters. "Instead, you became weak, loving, human. But you also became whole. Maybe that's stronger. Maybe I was wrong." 3 weeks later, Daejong announced his retirement and named Minjun as successor, giving Juro his blessing to leave with honor. On opening day of the Richardson Community Center in Bedford-Stuyvesant, 200 people crowded into the renovated warehouse space. Angelina stood at the front, looking at teenagers who'd aged out of the system just like she had, and felt her life finally make sense. Juro and Yuna sat in the third row with Mina and Franklin. Mrs. Kang was there, arm fully healed. Even Daejong Lee stood quietly in the back, and when Angelina caught his eye, he nodded with something that might have been respect. A young black girl with tired eyes approached after the speeches. "I aged out last month. Can you help me?" Angelina pulled her into a hug. "Yes, you're not alone anymore. None of us are." 1 year after that rainy November night on the number 7 bus, Angelina Richardson stood in the Richardson Community Center in Bedford-Stuyvesant and watched sunset paint Brooklyn gold and purple. Behind her, 200 kids filled the renovated warehouse space on Nostrand Avenue, their laughter echoing off exposed brick walls decorated with murals they'd painted themselves. Her staff of 5 served hot meals at communal tables, helped with homework in the tutoring corner, facilitated art therapy sessions in the converted loading dock. The center operated 6 days a week, funded entirely by the Lee Family Foundation that Yuna managed with fierce precision. Franklin was almost 3 now, running through the playground with fearless joy that came from being deeply loved and consistently safe. He'd stopped asking about their old studio apartment months ago because the modest 2-bedroom in Clinton Hill was home now, where the heat worked and neighbors smiled. Franklin called Mina sister without anyone teaching him to, and every Saturday the children had play dates that usually ended with both of them covered in paint or mud. Mina was walking now, toddling around the Park Avenue penthouse with determined steps, babbling in English and Korean. She thrived, surrounded by multiple adults who adored her, splitting time between nursing sessions with Angelina twice weekly and bottle feeding with Yuna the rest of the time. No pressure, no competition, just 2 women who'd learned to mother 1 child. Together. Angelina had finished her online degree in social work 8 months ago, passing her licensing exam on the first try and specializing in foster care trauma therapy. She saw clients 3 days a week at the community center, helping teenagers navigate the impossible transition from state care to independence. She was dating casually now, coffee with a teacher from Franklin's preschool, learning slowly to trust that not every man would disappear. Juro and Yuna encouraged her romantic life with enthusiasm that might have been awkward if it wasn't so genuine. Juro had transformed in ways that still surprised her. He taught Franklin Taekwondo every Thursday evening at the community center, patient and encouraging with all the kids who joined the free class. He volunteered twice monthly, teaching financial literacy workshops, helping teenagers understand credit and how to build wealth from nothing. He attended therapy every Tuesday morning, working through PTSD from 15 years of violence, learning to hold his daughter without seeing his dead wife's face. Una had returned to painting with intensity that spoke of healing through creation. Her studio produced canvases that Chelsea galleries were starting to notice, abstract works in bleeding colors that captured trauma and hope equally. She facilitated art therapy groups for survivors of domestic violence and kidnapping, turning her nightmare into connection. Her friendship with Angelina had evolved into something sisterly and deep. Mrs. Kang had become the children's surrogate grandmother, fully healed from her gunshot wound, living in a separate penthouse apartment 2 floors below that Juro had purchased. She taught both Franklin and Mina Korean folk songs and traditional recipes, spoiling them with the fierce love of a woman who'd lost her own daughter decades ago. On a rainy Tuesday evening in late November, almost exactly 1 year later, Angelina rode the number 7 bus home with Franklin dozing against her shoulder. 3 rows back, a young Latina woman struggled with a screaming infant while juggling grocery bags, exhaustion written into every line of her face. Franklin stirred and whispered, "Mama, help them?" Angelina looked at her son's concerned face and open heart, stood up carefully, and walked down the aisle to where the struggling mother sat. "Looks like you're having a rough night. Can I help?" The woman's eyes filled with tears of relief, and in that moment, Angelina saw herself a year ago, desperate and drowning, and trying so hard to keep it together. People ask if I regret that night, getting involved with a stranger's crying baby on a bus, stepping into a world of violence and impossible choices. I don't regret it, not for a second. Because sometimes the family you chooses you back, and sometimes saving someone else is actually how you save yourself. That week, they all gathered for dinner at the Park Avenue penthouse, even Minjun between business meetings. The table was chaotic with children and food and conversation in multiple languages, and Angelina looked around at these people who'd become her family through choice rather than blood, and felt overwhelmingly grateful. That night, after putting Franklin to bed, Angelina finally opened Mrs. Chen's envelope. Inside was a letter. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. Don't let this world make it smaller. Keep giving, keep loving, keep showing up. That's your superpower." Behind the letter were 50 $100 bills, $5,000 from a woman who'd died, with almost nothing but had saved everything for the girl who'd stayed. Angelina cried happy tears, and when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of bus rides and crying babies, and all the small moments of compassion that add up to a whole life. I got on that bus looking for a way home after a triple shift, exhausted and broke and barely holding it together. I found something better. I found my people, my purpose, my proof that broken things can heal into shapes more beautiful than their original form. What's the most unexpected blessing that came from helping a stranger? Share your story in the comments. And if this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe. You never know whose story might change your life next. This story is fictional, but the struggles are real. Thousands of single mothers face impossible choices daily. Thank you for watching. Remember that compassion costs nothing, but it's worth everything. See you in the next story.